The summer of 1976 settled over New York City like a suffocating blanket. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, rising from the pavement in ripples, bending the air, distorting the edges of buildings like a fever dream. The city was broke, crime was high, garbage strikes filled sidewalks with rotting refuse, and the blackout riots were still fresh in collective memory. Graffiti crawled across subway cars like vines. The nights hummed with noise, sirens, shouts, and the constant throb of unrest. But beneath all that, something darker was beginning to stir. Something quiet, patient, watching. In Yonkers, a man walked alone down a narrow street just after midnight, his footsteps deliberate, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with a rigid, internal tension, as if each step were forced into line by some unseen command. His name was David Berkowitz, though in this moment, he didn't quite feel like David. Not the David who grew up with adoptive parents in the Bronx. Not the David who felt abandoned when his adoptive mother died. Not the David who drifted between menial jobs, lonely apartments, and a growing sense that life was conspiring against him. This David felt different. This one felt chosen. He paused under a dim street lamp, watching moths fling themselves again and again at the buzzing halo of light. Their wings smacked the glass, desperate, frantic, never realizing they were doomed. He stared at them for a long moment, as if the sight comforted him. They never learn, he whispered to himself. None of them ever learn. He continued walking. At the end of the block sat a house with flaking white paint and a sagging porch. Stray cats prowled around the yard, weaving between overgrown bushes. Berkowitz slowed his steps. His eyes darkened with a familiar blend of fear, resentment, and a strange reverence. This was the house he believed spoke to him. Or rather, the dog inside it. A massive black Labrador named Harvey belonged to his neighbor, Sam Carr. The dog barked constantly, a deep, echoing howl that carried through the night and burrowed into David's mind. But Berkowitz didn't hear normal barking. He heard commands. He heard threats. He heard a voice that convinced him he was being hunted by supernatural forces. And eventually, he heard orders. Kill for me. David swallowed hard, standing before the house like a soldier awaiting orders. He knew the dog wasn't barking now, the yard was eerily silent, but he felt the voice anyway, rumbling through his skull like a distant drum. He felt chosen. He felt necessary. And soon, he would feel powerful. Across the city, life continued as usual, or as usual as New York could manage in 1976. Brooklyn teenagers cruised down Shore Road with windows open and radios blasting Springsteen. Queens couples parked in lovers' lanes near Cunningham Park, enjoying the illusion of privacy in the humid dark. In the Bronx, fire hydrants sprayed arcs of water as kids shrieked and dove through the streams. People sought escape from the heat in any way they could. The city was loud, chaotic, crowded. But the city was also distracted, and distractions were fertile ground for monsters. On a warm July evening, Donna Lauria stepped out onto the stoop of her building in the Bronx, saying good night to her friend Jody Valenti. Donna was 18, bright and hopeful, with an easy smile. She was the kind of girl people liked instantly, kind, funny, quick to offer comfort to a friend. Jody, 19, was more serious, with sharp eyes and a protective streak toward Donna. They had spent the night at a friend's house, talking about school, summer plans, and boys. Normal things, light things, the things teenage girls have always talked about, unaware their words of building the last memories they will leave behind. Donna's father was awake when they arrived home, leaning out the apartment window with the casual vigilance of a man who always made sure his daughter got home safe. He waved to them. "You ladies all right?" He called. "Yeah, Dad." Donna laughed. "We're just talking a second." She and Jody sat in Jody's parked car, doors open to let in the thin breeze. The street was quiet, unusually quiet. Most people were inside, trying to cool off in front of fans. A lone streetlight flickered above them, casting short, trembling shadows. Jody tapped the steering wheel, talking about something trivial, a classmate, a dress she wanted to buy, when Donna suddenly stiffened. "Did you see that?" Donna whispered. Jody frowned. "See what?" Donna leaned forward slightly. That guy across the street. A man had appeared on the sidewalk, walking slowly, almost mechanically. He wore a simple shirt and dark pants, nothing unusual, but something about him felt wrong. He wasn't wandering. He wasn't lost. He was approaching. Jody felt it too, an instinctive prickling at the back of her neck. "Maybe he's just passing by," she said, though her voice betrayed her unease. He didn't pass by. He came closer, step by step, directly toward them. Jody reached for the door. "Let's go inside." But she was too late. The man stopped right beside the driver's window. He raised one hand. There was something in it. Something metallic. Heavy. Cold. Donna gasped. Oh my God. The flash from the .44 Bulldog revolver lit up the dark like a camera bulb. A thunderous crack split the night. Donna slumped back instantly, a red bloom spreading through her shirt. Jody screamed, ducking as two more shots shattered glass and tore into the car door. The man didn't run at first. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing hard, staring at what he had done with a mix of terror and twisted satisfaction. Then he turned and walked away. Not ran, walked. Jody scrambled out of the car, screaming for help. Donna's father burst from the building, shouting her name, stumbling down the steps as neighbors spilled onto the sidewalk. Sirens pierced the air minutes later, echoing down the Bronx streets. Donna died before they reached the hospital. The city didn't know it yet, but this was the opening move of a nightmare that would paralyze New York for an entire year. When Berkowitz returned to his apartment, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat alone in the darkness, the gun still resting in his hand. His heart was pounding, adrenaline roaring through his body like a storm. He expected guilt. He expected fear. He expected to feel sick, or faint, or panicked. Instead, he felt calm. No, he felt triumphant. Something inside him had awakened, something ancient and addictive. He placed the gun on the table carefully, as if it were a sacred object. He sat back, staring at it, chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. "You've done well," the voice told him. He didn't know if it came from the dog, or the shadows, or the part of his mind he no longer recognized as his own. But he heard it clearly. He closed his eyes. He smiled. The newspapers the next morning carried small headlines. Bronx teen killed in late-night shooting, young woman slain, friend injured, police seek suspect in random attack. It didn't look like much yet, not compared to the political scandals, police budget crises, or the near-bankrupt economy. But in the following weeks, something strange happened. People began to whisper about the shooter. Young women, especially brunettes, became uneasy walking alone at night. Parents warned their daughters. Boyfriends insisted on escorting girlfriends to their doors. Teenagers cancelled late-night outings. Residents of the Bronx double-checked their locks, peering anxiously through peepholes when footsteps echoed in the hall. It wasn't fear, exactly. Not yet. But it was something like a shiver, subtle, persistent, creeping along the spine of the city. A shiver that had only just begun. Meanwhile, Berkowitz found his thoughts consumed by the event. He replayed it in his mind again and again. The way the girl had gasped, the flash of the gun, the raw power in his hands. He felt no remorse. Instead, he felt compelled. Drawn. Like he had stepped onto a path that had been waiting for him all along. At night, he wrote letters he never sent, rambling, feverish notes about demons, commands, and fate. He scribbled phrases on scraps of paper. "I am the sun. Papa Sam keeps me up at night. Kill for me. I must honor the pact." His mind was unraveling slowly, steadily, like a rope fraying strand by strand. And no one around him noticed. How could they? He looked ordinary, unremarkable. Just another lonely man in a city filled with them. But inside, he was becoming something else. Something that would soon earn a name etched in terror, the son of Sam. The city seemed to sigh in the aftermath of the first killings. New York was never quiet, but now there was an undercurrent of tension, almost palpable, threading through the streets like electricity. People whispered in elevators, exchanged wary glances on subways, and locked doors earlier than usual. Mothers warned daughters not to linger outside at night. Taxi drivers glanced over their shoulders. Even the police, hardened by years of violence and bureaucracy, felt something unusual, a predator moving with method, not chaos. Berkowitz watched it all from his small, cluttered apartment in Yonkers. He moved through the room silently, a shadow himself, blending with the peeling wallpaper and dim lighting. Each day felt like a rehearsal for what was coming next. He wrote constantly in notebooks, notes that twisted reality into ritual, obsession into divine command. Words scrawled across pages. The fire inside must be fed. Harvey speaks. I obey. The son of Sam rises. The dog in Sam Carr's house no longer barked at him merely it commanded, threatened, instructed. The line between hallucination and reality blurred. Every step he took outside felt like walking a stage set. The city his theatre, the people his unwilling actors, the gun his instrument. On the other side of the city, Detective Ed Ziggo and his partner SGT, Anthony Lesser, were piecing together the fragments of the first attacks. The pattern was barely visible. Shootings at night, mostly against young women, usually with a .44 caliber weapon, seemingly random. But the randomness was an illusion. They sensed intelligence, planning, and most importantly, obsession. This isn't just a kid with a gun, Ziggo said, staring at a map of the city littered with pins and string. This guy has picking them for a reason. Maybe color, hair, proximity, some pattern were missing. SGT. Lesser rubbed his temples. The problem is, we have no witnesses who can identify him. No motive. Nothing but terrified victims and a weapon. The newspapers had started to cover the story extensively. Headlines screamed about a madman in the Bronx or the killer with no name. But Berkowitz watched the coverage like a spectator at a carnival. He didn't care about the panic. In fact, the attention exhilarated him. Each article, each television report, was a testament to his growing control, proof that his actions mattered. And they did matter, to the voice in his head. As July turned into August, Berkowitz struck again. A young couple, walking home late after a movie in Queens, felt the night close around them like a predator's paw. The man, oblivious, joked with his girlfriend. She, a little more wary, clutched his arm. Then the first crack of the gun echoed from a nearby alley. The man collapsed instantly, blood spraying across the asphalt. The woman tried to scream but was silenced by another shot. Panic erupted, lights flickered, distant sirens wailed. Berkowitz walked away as if nothing had happened. Pedestrians who arrived minutes later found chaos, broken glass, blood, and shock, but no immediate explanation. The city was beginning to whisper the name Son of Sam, though no one knew his face, his address, or even his real identity. And that anonymity made him more terrifying. Inside his apartment, Berkowitz cleaned the .44, methodically, almost ceremonially. Each component was polished, each shell casing examined. He handled the gun like it was an extension of his own hand, and in some ways, it was. The voice was quieter now, satisfied, but it would return. Always it returned, demanding more. He stared into the mirror. For a moment, he barely recognized himself. Pale skin, haunted eyes, thin lips pressed tight in anticipation. The mask of normality was cracking, revealing the monster underneath. And yet, he still felt human enough to be frustrated with the world. The world, he thought, doesn't understand me. They'll never understand me. And they will fear me. The detectives struggled to find leads. Neighborhoods were canvassed. Every pawnshop and gun store checked for recent sales of a .44 caliber revolver. Witness descriptions were vague, inconsistent, contradictory. Each attack left police frustrated, the public panicked, and the press hungry for details. But Berkowitz was clever. He moved silently, striking only when he felt commanded, always calculating, always certain. Each killing was ritualistic. Each shot deliberate. Each victim part of a grim choreography he believed was ordained by forces beyond human comprehension. He began leaving letters at crime scenes, a signature to assert control. Written in jagged handwriting, they mocked the city and taunted the police. I am the son of Sam. I kill to do his work. I obey. The letters were chilling, yet revealing nothing. They showed intelligence, obsession, but no identity. They spread fear, and fear was the city's lifeblood now. By late August, New York was caught in a fever. Crime rates had spiked in other boroughs, though the Son of Sam attacks were the ones dominating headlines. People stayed indoors at night. Streets emptied earlier. Neighborhoods became fortresses of locks, chains, and makeshift alarms. Mothers clutched children tighter. Boyfriends walked their dates home, carrying keys and whistles. And in the darkness, Berkowitz watched it all, invisible, untouched. He felt the city bend to his will. But obsession is a hunger that never satiates. And soon, the voice would demand more. By the autumn of 1976, New York City was a city transformed. The heat of the summer had burned itself out, leaving behind a chill that gnawed at the bones, but the fear that had taken root was far from fading. It wrapped itself around the city streets, infiltrated apartment buildings, and settled into the restless minds of its residents. People no longer walked freely after dark. The night itself seemed dangerous, a predator hiding behind every shadow. Mothers warned daughters, neighbors whispered through closed doors, and even the police felt the invisible weight of something relentless, something intelligent, calculating. David Berkowitz moved through the city like a phantom. The streets were familiar to him, but now every corner, every alley, every flickering streetlight became a part of his ritual. He watched, waited, and planned. He no longer considered himself merely a man. He was an instrument of something larger, something he could not define but could feel with perfect clarity. Each night, the .44 revolver felt like an extension of his will, a tool for enforcing the commands that came to him through the darkness. The voice of Sam had grown insistent, commanding, whispering threats, issuing orders that merged with his own fractured thoughts. The killings continued, methodical, terrifying, random in appearance yet precise in execution. Couples walking home from movies, teenagers lingering on stoops, women stepping out of cars late at night, none were safe. Each attack was calculated, chosen for its symbolism as much as for opportunity. Berkowitz believed he was carrying out a divine mandate, a necessary cleansing of the corrupt world around him. Every shot fired reinforced his sense of purpose, every victim a note in a symphony that only he could hear. Police investigations deepened. Detectives pored over witness statements, maps of the city, ballistics reports, and patterns that seemed to evade comprehension. Ed Zigo and SGT. Lesser worked tirelessly, stitching together fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit. Each time a new attack occurred, the city's panic escalated. Public transit became a minefield of suspicion. People scanned each other in subway cars and buses with suspicion and fear. The press had coined a name for the killer, Son of Sam, after an anonymous letter left at a crime scene, and the moniker quickly spread, becoming a symbol of terror. In his apartment, Berkowitz embraced the isolation, the darkness, the silence. The world outside, so loud, so chaotic, so oblivious, was now under his control. He mapped the streets in his mind, memorized patterns of human behavior, anticipated reactions before they happened. He lived simultaneously in two worlds: the tangible, ordinary city filled with oblivious pedestrians, and the shadow city of commands, voices, and rituals that only he could perceive. He scribbled endlessly in notebooks, cryptic messages about destiny, obedience, and his place in a grand, terrifying design. The tension in the city escalated with each new murder. The public grew paranoid. Women began to travel in groups, men walked behind their partners, and entire neighborhoods fell into anxious silence at night. Storefronts left lights on late into the evening, and the presence of a lone figure walking the streets at odd hours elicited nervous stares. Police patrols increased, block watches were organized, but no strategy could predict where Berkowitz would strike next. His attacks were random in the eyes of the world but deliberate in his own. Each killing reinforced his self-image as the chosen one, the executor of commands that originated beyond mortal understanding. Letters continued to appear, written in jagged, feverish handwriting. They taunted the police, threatened the city, and reinforced his persona as the Son of Sam. In them, he described his actions as acts of obedience to a higher power, claiming responsibility while maintaining the illusion of supernatural compulsion. These letters stoked the flames of fear, captivating journalists, horrifying citizens, and frustrating law enforcement. They became a form of communication, a ritualized performance that elevated his sense of power and inevitability. One night, Berkowitz selected a new target. It was late October, the air crisp with approaching winter, the city wrapped in fog and shadow. He trailed a young couple walking home from a late-night diner, observing them from the darkness. He measured their movements, noted the angle of streetlights, the proximity of apartment buildings, and the pattern of foot traffic. He waited until the moment aligned with his inner mandate, the voice in his mind reaching a crescendo of urgency. The shooting was swift, almost ritualistic. Each shot precise, each impact a reaffirmation of purpose. The couple fell, chaos erupted, and Berkowitz melted back into the night like smoke. Witnesses screamed, police sirens wailed, and the city shuddered again, but the man responsible remained invisible. His calculated detachment terrified those who would later recount the events. The randomness of the victims added to the sensation of a world under siege by an unseen, omnipresent force. Berkowitz returned to his apartment, cleaning the revolver with methodical care. The act itself was a ritual, as sacred and essential as the shootings. He inspected each component, aligned the barrel, polished the grip, and prepared for the next night, when the city would once again fall under his shadow. In the quiet of his home, he reviewed his notes, studied city maps, and wrote letters he would leave behind in future attacks. Each page was a testament to his obsession, a record of his compulsion, a declaration of his perceived destiny. The police were desperate for leads. Neighborhood canvassing, gun store inspections, witness interviews, they yielded little. Descriptions of the shooter were vague and inconsistent, sometimes contradicting each other entirely. Each crime scene added pressure, frustration, and public hysteria. Ziggo and Lesser could sense the intelligence behind the killings but could not identify the mind controlling them. The city itself seemed to cooperate with the killer, providing anonymity, distractions, and chaos that allowed him to operate with terrifying effectiveness. Media coverage intensified. Newspapers, radio shows, and television broadcasts chronicled each murder with grim fascination. Tips flooded in, many false, some insightful but insufficient. The son of Sam had become a spectre, a phantom menace that could appear anywhere, strike anyone, and vanish without trace. The myth grew faster than the man, and the city's collective consciousness became a canvas for fear, paranoia, and obsession. Inside his apartment, Berkowitz continued his nightly routines. The .44 revolver was his constant companion, an extension of self, a sacred instrument. His thoughts were dominated by visions, voices, and compulsions that demanded fulfillment. He began to see patterns in the city where none existed, connections between events that reinforced his sense of purpose. Every random encounter became meaningful. Every glance from a passerby could be interpreted as recognition of his destiny. As November approached, the frequency of attacks increased. New York City, once vibrant and noisy, became subdued, cautious, haunted. Streets emptied earlier, bars closed sooner, and citizens moved through their routines with eyes wide and ears alert. The police were under immense pressure. Public demand for results was insistent, angry, and growing. Ziggo and Lesser intensified investigations, working with federal authorities, analyzing ballistics reports, and trying to anticipate patterns, but each night brought more violence, more letters, and more fear. Berkowitz's obsession deepened. Each successful attack reinforced his self-concept as the son of Sam. Each letter solidified his power. Each moment of anonymity strengthened his belief in invincibility. He began to perceive the city as a stage, its inhabitants as actors, the police as obstacles in a ritual drama that only he could direct. The distinction between reality and delusion blurred further, until actions and compulsion were inseparable. The killings continued with a relentless rhythm. Patterns emerged that only Berkowitz could decipher. Randomness for the city was order for him. He believed himself enacting commands from a higher power, and the .44 revolver was the sacred tool for enforcement. Each murder was ritual, each letter a prayer, each night a step deeper into obsession. By mid-November, the city was gripped by terror unlike any seen before. Public transportation operated under watchful eyes, parents guarded children with obsessive vigilance, and streets emptied quickly after dark. The son of Sam was no longer an anonymous threat. He was a myth, a shadow, a name whispered in fear. And yet, Berkowitz remained unseen, untouched, invisible. His planning, precision, and ritualistic discipline allowed him to move through the city freely, striking at will, leaving behind letters and chaos as proof of his dominance. He had become a force, not a man, a spectre of fear that the city could not comprehend and law enforcement could not contain. In the shadows of his apartment, he contemplated the next steps, the next targets, the next letters. Each act of violence reinforced the mythology he had created around himself, strengthening his belief in the divine nature of his mission. The city was his canvas, and fear was his art. He was the son of Sam, and the city trembled in obedience. By December of 1976, New York City was a city transformed by fear. Streets that had once been alive with laughter and chatter were now dim, shadowed, and suspicious. Storefronts kept lights burning late into the night, and apartment windows glowed with the artificial reassurance of life inside. Mothers scolded children for lingering too long outside. Men walked behind their partners, clutching keys in tight fists. The city had learned caution, but the predator was learning, too. The son of Sam moved unseen, weaving through the maze of streets and alleyways, studying patterns, anticipating behaviors, and perfecting his ritual of violence. David Berkowitz had grown more methodical. Each killing was no longer just a release of compulsion, it was a performance, a calculated assertion of power. The .44 revolver, polished and cared for as meticulously as any sacred relic, had become an extension of his very identity. Every shot he fired, every victim he selected, was a note in the symphony of terror that played endlessly in his mind. He wrote letters, carefully crafted, each one a mixture of threat, confession, and grotesque poetry. Each letter stoked the flames of hysteria across the city, while reinforcing the mythology he was creating around himself. Detectives Ed Ziggo and SGT. Anthony Lesser were exhausted. Weeks had passed, and the case seemed to have no discernible pattern, no logical connection between victims other than the weapon used. They reviewed maps, spoke to terrified witnesses, and followed every lead, but the killer was always one step ahead. The city was desperate for answers. Newspaper headlines screamed warnings, advised precautions, and described the chilling letters left behind at the crime scenes. The press, in some sense, was complicit in creating the legend. The more attention, the more fear, the more power for the son of Sam. In his apartment, Berkowitz felt invincible. He watched television coverage of the investigations, noting every mistake, every false lead, every misinterpretation. Each broadcast, each article, confirmed the extent of his dominance. No one could catch him. No one could stop him. The city was a stage, the people actors, and he the unseen director pulling invisible strings. One evening, Berkowitz selected his next victim. The night was cold, crisp, and clear. The fog of fear hung low over the city, distorting light, shadow, and perception. A young woman walked home from a late-night diner, oblivious to the storm closing in around her. Berkowitz followed, silent as a ghost, calculating, measuring the angle of the streetlights, the positioning of apartment windows, the likely response of any passerby. When he acted, it was swift, deliberate, precise. 2 shots fired from the .44, the impact immediate and deadly. The woman fell, her scream cutting through the chill air. Berkowitz retreated, disappearing into the fog as sirens began to wail in the distance. He did not run. He did not panic. The act was completed, the ritual fulfilled, the power reaffirmed. In the aftermath, the city's fear intensified. People whispered the name Son of Sam with a mix of terror and fascination. Each murder made the legend grow. Each letter left at a crime scene was dissected by police, journalists, and citizens alike, adding layers to the mythology. Berkowitz, in the safety of his apartment, reviewed each letter, marveling at the effect they had on the public consciousness. Fear was a language, and he had become fluent. The police, meanwhile, were reaching the limits of their patience and ingenuity. They increased patrols, canvassed neighborhoods relentlessly, and tried to anticipate the killer's next move. Tips poured in from citizens, many false, some plausible, but all ultimately leading nowhere. Witnesses provided conflicting descriptions. Tall, short, dark hair, light hair, calm, nervous. The contradictions made the profile difficult to pin down. And yet, the detectives knew the killer was intelligent, deliberate, methodical. Inside his apartment, Berkowitz continued his obsessive routines. The gun was cleaned nightly, notes were reviewed, maps were marked with potential routes and target areas. The voice in his head, that commanding, inescapable presence, guided him, dictated his actions, and reinforced his belief in destiny. The lines between reality and delusion blurred further. He was not simply a man with a gun, he was a vessel of commands, a performer in a citywide theater of fear. As the weeks passed, Berkowitz began to take more risks. His attacks became bolder, the timing more unpredictable. He moved in plain sight, observing his targets, blending with the crowds, yet always maintaining control. Each successful strike heightened his confidence, strengthened his delusions, and deepened his sense of inevitability. The city had become both canvas and accomplice, providing anonymity and chaos that allowed him to operate with terrifying freedom. Meanwhile, detectives Ziggo and Lesser explored new avenues. They collaborated with the FBI, analyzed ballistic evidence, and consulted criminal psychologists to create a profile of the unknown killer. They hypothesized patterns, predicted behavior, and attempted to anticipate future attacks. Every new shooting, however, frustrated their efforts. Berkowitz's meticulous planning and understanding of human behavior rendered many of their strategies ineffective. The media coverage intensified. Newspapers, television, and radio outlets sensationalized the killings, disseminating letters, eyewitness reports, and speculative analyses. The public became both witness and participant in the fear, reacting with heightened caution, paranoia, and obsession. Communities organized neighborhood watches, parents enforced strict curfews on children, and citizens moved through the city with heightened vigilance. The Son of Sam's legend grew with every article, every broadcast, every whispered conversation. Berkowitz thrived in this climate. Each day, each night, the city's terror reinforced his sense of power and purpose. The killings were no longer just acts of compulsion, they were performances, statements, rituals that validated his identity as the Son of Sam. He meticulously documented every act, crafted letters designed to taunt, to terrify, and to communicate his perceived destiny. The letters were both confession and proclamation, reinforcing the mythology and intensifying the fear throughout New York. By late December, the city had entered a state of near panic. Citizens were cautious, fearful, and hyper-aware of the darkness around them. Streets emptied earlier, public transportation became tense and wary, and even the most mundane nighttime activities carried risk. The Son of Sam was no longer an unknown threat, he was a myth come alive, an invisible force that the city could neither comprehend nor confront effectively. Berkowitz's confidence and obsession continued to grow. Each attack reinforced his self-concept as the chosen one, each letter solidified his power, and each act of violence blurred the line between ritual and reality. He began to see the city as a stage, the people as actors, and the police as obstacles in a ritual drama that only he could orchestrate. His perception of reality was dominated by the voice that guided him, compelling him to commit acts that terrified an entire metropolis. The police, under immense pressure, intensified their efforts. They coordinated patrols, surveilled neighborhoods, and analyzed each crime scene for patterns or clues. Yet Berkowitz remained one step ahead, using the city's chaos and anonymity to his advantage. His attacks were deliberate, ritualistic, and strategically timed, reinforcing the mythology he was creating around himself. The city, in effect, became both witness and participant in the unfolding horror. In his apartment, Berkowitz meticulously prepared for the next series of attacks. Maps were reviewed, targets observed, notes studied, and letters drafted. The .44 revolver was cleaned, polished, and readied for use. Each night, he executed his routines with precision, reinforcing the ritualistic nature of his compulsion. His delusions, strengthened by success and public fear, merged seamlessly with reality, creating a mindset in which he was both the instrument and executor of a divine mandate. As January approached, the frequency and boldness of attacks increased. Berkowitz operated with growing confidence, striking in areas once considered safe, targeting victims with a deliberate randomness that defied prediction. The city's panic reached new heights. Citizens moved cautiously, and the police, despite exhaustive efforts, remained unable to identify the killer. Each murder, each letter, and each publicized detail strengthened the legend of the Son of Sam, further entrenching fear and hysteria throughout New York. Berkowitz's obsession had reached a peak. Every act, every note, every movement reinforced his identity as the Son of Sam. He lived simultaneously in two realities: the city's physical, observable world, and the private, ritualistic world dominated by the voice that commanded him. The boundary between delusion and reality was irrelevant. Actions and compulsion were inseparable, and the city existed as both stage and audience for his unfolding ritual of terror. The detectives, increasingly desperate, intensified investigations, coordinated neighborhood watches, and sought public assistance. Despite their tireless efforts, Berkowitz's calculated planning and ritualistic execution rendered many of their strategies ineffective. The city remained gripped by fear, each new act of violence and each published letter reinforcing the mythos of the Son of Sam. By mid-January, the city had succumbed to near-constant terror. Streets emptied, public spaces were avoided after dark, and ordinary life was overshadowed by the anticipation of violence. Berkowitz, operating with impunity, had transformed the city into a canvas of fear, orchestrating acts of violence that reinforced both his identity and the legend he cultivated. The myth of the Son of Sam had become inseparable from the reality of the man behind it, yet the city had no knowledge of the face behind the terror. In the shadows of his apartment, Berkowitz planned relentlessly, preparing for further attacks, crafting letters to leave at crime scenes, and refining his perception of control over the city. Each successful act validated his identity, strengthened his delusions, and intensified the climate of fear. The son of Sam had become more than a man. He was a force, a shadow, a myth that dominated the city's collective consciousness. Winter had tightened its grip on New York City. Frost coated the streets in a thin, glimmering layer, and each breath of cold air seemed to echo in the narrow alleys and abandoned lots where shadows pooled. The city, already tense from months of terror, now moved slower, quieter, weighed down by fear and winter's chill. The people who had once gone about their routines now measured each step, each glance, each sound, as if the night itself could devour them. David Berkowitz had become more disciplined in his rituals. He no longer acted purely on compulsion. He had learned to anticipate police responses, media coverage, and public panic. Each attack, each letter, each carefully timed appearance was part of a larger design, a strategy that reinforced his mythology as the son of Sam. He walked the city with the precision of a predator stalking prey, silent and invisible, measuring every block, noting every flicker of movement. The .44 revolver in his hand was not just a weapon. It was a talisman, a tool of obedience, and a symbol of his growing dominion over the city's fear. Detectives Ed Ziggo and SGT. Anthony Lesser were under immense pressure. The killings were no longer random events. They had become a public obsession. Every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every television report scrutinized the police's efforts, criticized missteps, and amplified the citywide panic. Ziggo and Lesser spent nights poring over maps, timelines, and witness reports, attempting to predict the killer's next move. Their frustration grew as the son of Sam continued to elude capture, leaving behind letters, blood, and terror. Berkowitz began leaving increasingly cryptic letters at crime scenes. Some were direct confessions, others were taunts, riddles, or philosophical musings on obedience, destiny, and the nature of evil. Each letter spread fear further, captivating the media and terrifying the public. He reveled in the attention, feeding his delusions and reinforcing the narrative he had created. He was no longer simply a man committing murders. He was a force, a shadow moving through the city, an agent of chaos perceived as divine purpose. One particularly bitter night in January, Berkowitz chose a target in Brooklyn. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the occasional lone figure hurrying home. He stalked a young couple, noting their nervous glances and cautious steps. He timed his movements with meticulous care, aligning streetlights and shadows in his mind, calculating the optimal moment for action. When the moment came, it was executed with precision. Shots rang out, echoing against the brick walls, shattering windows and terrorizing the neighborhood. The couple fell, screams cutting through the cold air. Berkowitz melted into the darkness as sirens wailed in the distance. He walked calmly, almost ceremoniously, back to the safety of his apartment, cleaning the .44 as he had countless times before. Each act reinforced his belief in destiny, each shot confirmed his control over the city, each escape affirmed his invincibility. The police intensified their efforts. Ziggo and Lesser coordinated with multiple precincts, revisited every tip, interviewed witnesses repeatedly, and explored every potential lead. They reviewed ballistic reports, analyzed geographic patterns, and consulted criminal psychologists to better understand the killer's mindset. Despite exhaustive efforts, the son of Sam remained elusive. His intelligence, discipline, and understanding of human behavior allowed him to remain invisible while terrorizing a metropolis. Berkowitz, meanwhile, began to feel the compulsion not just as orders but as a calling. Every street became a stage, every pedestrian an actor, every siren a signal in the ritual that governed his nights. He mapped his routes meticulously, noted escape paths, anticipated responses, and left letters that simultaneously confessed and defied. Fear was currency, and he was wealthy beyond measure. The city's paranoia intensified. Parents no longer allowed children out after dark. Women traveled in groups or avoided the streets altogether. Nightly walks were abandoned. People checked behind them, scanned alleys, and mistrusted strangers. The son of Sam's legend had grown beyond a single man. He had become a myth that dominated the city's collective consciousness. Berkowitz's obsession deepened. He began to dwell in imagined scenarios of capture, escape, and confrontation, rehearsing every contingency. He studied news reports obsessively, tracking police behavior, public reactions, and media framing. Each observation reinforced his sense of superiority, control, and inevitability. He was untouchable, a phantom commanding the city from the shadows. Yet cracks began to show. The compulsion became more urgent, more insistent. The voice demanding obedience grew louder, unrelenting. Each murder provided only temporary relief. The hunger returned, more intense, more consuming. Berkowitz's rituals became stricter, his planning more intricate, and his movements increasingly confined to patterns of avoidance and anticipation. The thrill of power now carried with it a tension that gnawed at him constantly. Police investigators noticed subtle patterns emerging. Crime scenes shared similarities, victimology was slowly being defined, and geographic profiling suggested zones where the killer might strike next. Analysts began to narrow potential targets, and public pressure for results mounted. Ziggo and Lesser coordinated stakeouts, undercover patrols, and community alerts. The net, while still ineffective, began to close slightly. Berkowitz's mental state continued its spiral. He viewed each person he passed as a potential actor, each street a set, each window a witness to his ritual. The city itself became a mirror for his obsession. The .44 revolver was not just a weapon, it was an extension of his psyche, a channel through which he imposed order on a world he perceived as chaotic. The lines between compulsion, ritual, and purpose blurred completely. As February approached, the killings continued at intervals, each act reinforcing his myth and intensifying fear. Letters were crafted with increasing sophistication, blending confession, theology, and philosophical musings. The public consumed them with morbid fascination, amplifying the legend. Berkowitz's identity as the son of Sam became inseparable from his actions. Each murder and letter reinforced his perception of inevitability and divine mandate. The city's response was frantic but methodical. Streets were patrolled more heavily, police presence increased, and neighborhood watches proliferated. Citizens moved cautiously, avoiding potential zones of attack. Media coverage reached fever pitch, scrutinizing police performance, amplifying panic, and analyzing letters for clues. Each report, in effect, served the son of Sam's purpose, spreading fear and reinforcing his persona. Berkowitz thrived in this climate. He refined his attacks, enhanced his routines, and deepened his obsession. Each successful murder validated his delusions, strengthened his sense of purpose, and expanded his control over the city. He began to integrate small rituals, obsessive routines, and meticulous planning into every act, reinforcing his identity as both predator and executor of divine command. The detectives remained relentless. Ziggo and Lesser expanded surveillance, employed informants, and sought psychological insights into the killer. They attempted to anticipate attacks through patterns, public reports, and forensic evidence. Yet Berkowitz's intelligence, discipline, and ability to remain unseen allowed him to elude capture. The city continued to exist under his shadow, every resident touched by fear and uncertainty. By the end of the chapter, the tension in New York had reached a near breaking point. Streets emptied after dark, public spaces were avoided, and ordinary life was overshadowed by the terror that gripped the city. The son of Sam had become both myth and reality, a presence that dominated consciousness without ever revealing a face. Berkowitz, increasingly confident, disciplined, and obsessive, prepared for the next series of attacks, each murder and letter further solidifying his legend and the city's collective hysteria. The hunt was tightening, the detectives closing in, and yet the predator remained steps ahead. The dance between fear and control continued, a spiral of terror that seemed destined to reach a breaking point. The city trembled, and the son of Sam moved silently, invisible, unstoppable in his mind. The winter of 1977 settled over New York City with a biting, relentless chill. Frost coated the streets, steam rose from manholes, and every footstep echoed sharply against brick walls and deserted sidewalks. The city's heartbeat had slowed, but the tension inside it throbbed like a living thing. People moved cautiously, glancing over shoulders, avoiding dimly lit streets, clutching keys in fists that trembled with fear. Mothers demanded early returns from daughters. Lovers abandoned nighttime walks. The city had learned to anticipate danger, yet the danger itself remained unseen. David Berkowitz's presence was everywhere and nowhere. He walked the streets like a shadow, invisible but observing everything, measuring every movement, timing every step, and calculating every opportunity. The .44 revolver in his hand was no longer just a weapon, it was a sacred instrument, an extension of his identity, a symbol of control over the city that had unknowingly become his stage. Each victim was chosen with ritual precision. Every shot fired a note in the symphony of fear he orchestrated. The letters he left at crime scenes, scrawled with feverish handwriting, were extensions of his will, taunting the city, mocking the police, and reinforcing his myth as the son of Sam. Detectives Ed Ziggo and SGT. Anthony Lesser were exhausted, worn by months of unrelenting investigation. The killings had escalated, and public pressure had reached a fever pitch. Newspaper headlines screamed for action. Television news programs dissected every murder and every letter. The city demanded results, and the police were determined to deliver. Maps of shootings were revisited repeatedly, witness statements cross-checked, and potential patterns examined with painstaking care. Yet Berkowitz remained elusive, leaving behind only fear, chaos, and a trail of cryptic notes. Berkowitz's obsession had intensified. The voice in his head, the entity he believed to be Sam, was insistent, commanding, and relentless. Every act of violence was dictated by this presence, every decision filtered through its influence. He meticulously planned routes, timed attacks, and studied patterns of human behavior to ensure maximum impact and minimal risk of detection. He believed he was fulfilling a divine mandate, cleansing the city of sin and chaos, though the logic of such beliefs existed only within the labyrinth of his mind. By February, the killings had spread beyond the Bronx and Brooklyn, reaching Queens, Staten Island, and Manhattan. The pattern appeared random, but careful observation suggested deliberate targeting. Young women with long dark hair, often in pairs, attacked during moments of vulnerability. The city reacted accordingly. Citizens avoided walking alone, lights burned long into the night, and the police presence increased visibly. Public transportation became tense, crowded with passengers scanning the faces around them for threats. Every sound, footsteps, rustling leaves, distant shouts, was met with suspicion. Fear had become omnipresent. Inside his apartment, Berkowitz's rituals became more elaborate. Each night began with careful inspection of the .44 revolver, followed by notes reviewing possible targets, routes, and contingency plans. He analyzed news reports obsessively, tracking police patterns, public behavior, and media attention. Each new article, each televised broadcast, each fearful whisper in the streets was a confirmation of his power and influence. He was simultaneously predator, conductor, and chronicler of his own legend. One particularly bitter night, Berkowitz selected his next target. A young woman leaving a movie theater in Queens caught his attention. He followed her, keeping to the shadows, timing his approach, calculating distances, and anticipating potential witnesses. He waited until the intersection was empty, streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. Then, in the cold, silent air, the shots rang out, sharp and decisive. The woman fell, screams pierced the darkness, and Berkowitz retreated, walking calmly as police sirens approached. In his apartment, he cleaned the revolver with meticulous care, catalogued the attack in his notebooks, and began drafting another letter. The detectives noticed subtle emerging patterns. Victims shared similarities, geographic profiling suggested zones of potential attacks, and psychological profiling provided a clearer picture of the perpetrator. Male, possibly white, exhibiting obsessive-compulsive behaviors, highly intelligent, methodical, and comfortable moving through urban environments unnoticed. Ziggo and Lesser intensified surveillance, implemented stakeouts, and coordinated with federal authorities. Every tip, however trivial, was investigated thoroughly, yet the killer remained several steps ahead, exploiting the city's chaos and anonymity. Berkowitz's obsession extended beyond the physical act of killing. He developed rituals around the letters, timing, and sequencing of attacks. Each act reinforced his identity as the son of Sam and strengthened the mythology that had grown around him. Fear, he believed, was his currency, and the city's hysteria his reward. The letters were carefully crafted, blending confession, justification, and menace, ensuring that the legend of the son of Sam spread faster than any police investigation could contain. As winter deepened, the city's panic reached its zenith. Streets emptied after dark. Citizens avoided certain neighborhoods entirely. School and work schedules were adjusted for perceived safety. Neighborhood watchers became nearly obsessive in vigilance. Public transportation was scrutinized, every stranger regarded with suspicion. The son of Sam's myth had become inseparable from reality, dominating consciousness without ever revealing a face. Berkowitz continued to thrive within this climate. He refined his attacks, perfected routines, and deepened his psychological grip on the city. Each killing was ritualistic, every letter a declaration, each night a rehearsal of a theater only he could perceive. The .44 revolver was more than a weapon. It was an instrument of order, fear, and obedience. His sense of invincibility grew alongside his delusions, blurring the line between reality and the obsessive rituals that govern him. Police efforts escalated. Detectives coordinated with precincts citywide, scrutinized behavioral patterns, conducted interviews, and sought assistance from criminal psychologists. They implemented measures to anticipate potential targets, deploy patrols strategically, and prevent further attacks. Yet Berkowitz's intelligence and meticulous planning allowed him to remain undetected. The city's fear continued to grow, each new attack and letter reinforcing the mythos of the son of Sam. Berkowitz's obsession began to manifest in compulsive behaviors beyond violence. He rehearsed escape routes, imagined confrontations with police, and monitored media coverage obsessively. Each successful murder was followed by careful reflection, documentation, and preparation for subsequent acts. His world had shrunk to the rhythm of compulsion, planning, and ritual, the city itself becoming both stage and participant in a narrative only he fully comprehended. By March, the killings had left the city in a state of constant dread. Streets emptied early, apartment windows remained lit, and residents moved cautiously at night. Citizens avoided public spaces, minimized nighttime activity, and scrutinized every stranger. Fear was pervasive, and the legend of the son of Sam was firmly entrenched. Berkowitz's calculated strikes, letters, and public persona as the son of Sam made him simultaneously omnipresent and invisible. The detectives, increasingly desperate, coordinated citywide patrols, implemented informant networks, and used psychological insights to anticipate attacks. They attempted to narrow down possible suspects and predict future patterns. Yet Berkowitz's intelligence, precision, and ability to navigate the urban environment with invisibility allowed him to evade capture, reinforcing the perception of invincibility and further terrifying the city. Within the confines of his apartment, Berkowitz continued his obsessive preparations. The .44 revolver was cleaned, notes reviewed, maps marked with potential targets, and letters drafted for future attacks. Each act of violence and each letter solidified the mythology he had created, reinforcing his identity as the son of Sam and his belief in his divine mandate. His perception of reality had become inseparable from compulsion, ritual, and fear. The tension between predator and city reached a breaking point. Berkowitz's psychological state intensified, the compulsion grew more insistent, and the need for action became urgent. Each act of violence, each letter, and each escape strengthened his self-concept and expanded his influence over New York's collective consciousness. The son of Sam had transcended the physical, becoming a force of myth, fear, and obsession that held the city in its grip. The hunt had tightened, yet the predator remained steps ahead. The detectives' efforts, though methodical and exhaustive, were still insufficient. Berkowitz operated with intelligence, discipline, and ritualistic precision, reinforcing both the legend and the terror. The city existed in a state of anticipatory fear, every citizen touched by anxiety, every shadow a potential threat. The son of Sam moved silently, unseen, unstoppable in his mind, and increasingly dominant over the psyche of an entire metropolis. Spring crept into New York City, but the cold shadow left by the son of Sam lingered. Streets were no longer just cold, they were tense, haunted by the memory of bullets, screams, and the invisible predator who walked among them. Citizens moved warily, their routines dictated by fear rather than desire. Parents dragged children indoors, lovers avoided night walks, and strangers in the subway exchanged suspicious glances. The city itself had become a mirror of paranoia. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, felt the tightening of the city's grip on him as acutely as the detectives felt his grip on the city. The compulsion was louder than ever, demanding action, precision, and ritual. Each murder, each letter, each step through the city streets reinforced his delusion of destiny. The .44 revolver rested in his hand like an extension of his very being. His apartment had become both sanctuary and command center. Maps sprawled across tables, notes stacked in obsessive piles, letters drafted and rewritten, all forming a web of control and order. But cracks were beginning to show. The thrill that once surged with every attack was tempered by unease. Patterns were emerging that he could sense even if he couldn't articulate them. The police were closing in, their methods becoming sharper, more coordinated. Every step he took required calculation, every route demanded scrutiny. The predator who once moved freely now felt the first pangs of pressure. Detectives Ziggo and Lesser intensified their efforts. They analyzed the letters for subtle clues, mapped shootings with increasing accuracy, and interviewed potential witnesses with relentless precision. Every corner, alley, and street was scrutinized. The son of Sam had become a citywide obsession, but finally, the net was tightening. They could feel it. He was close, perhaps overconfident, perhaps vulnerable. Berkowitz's internal world was a storm. The voice commanding him grew insistent, more urgent, demanding action while simultaneously warning of consequences. Fear, anticipation, and compulsion blended until the line between ritual and survival blurred. The city outside was a reflection of the chaos within. Every shadow, every passerby, every siren a reminder of both power and threat. One evening, Berkowitz prepared to strike again. He moved through the streets like a ghost, careful, silent, methodical. The streets were nearly empty, the air thick with tension. But the city had changed. He noticed movement in peripheral shadows, unfamiliar eyes watching. Every instinct told him to pause, to reconsider. For the first time, uncertainty crept into the ritual, a whisper of vulnerability. And yet, even on the edge of the abyss, Berkowitz persisted. The myth of the son of Sam had grown too powerful to abandon. Each step, each thought, each act of planning reinforced the terror that gripped the city. He was both hunter and captive of his own legend, bound to a cycle of compulsion that refused to relent. The city trembled in quiet anticipation. Police patrols intensified, citizens whispered in fear, and the son of Sam moved invisibly among them, a shadow commanding attention without appearing. The web was closing, the predator was being watched, and the stage was set for an ending long foretold yet uncertain in outcome. Berkowitz paused in an alley, the city alive with the tension of anticipation. He felt the thrill, the compulsion, and the encroaching pressure of inevitability. For a moment, he was still, listening to the echoes of the city and the insistent voice inside his head. The hunt, the fear, the legend, all converged in that instant. The city held its breath. The son of Sam was at the edge of the abyss. And then the silence of the night pressed down, waiting, knowing that everything was about to change.